However, subtle microaggressions are not so subtle on your self-concept and self-worth. If you are not prepared for them, the subtle racism of today can continue to cause great harm to your self-concept, much like the blatant racism of the past. Microaggressions are like a constant, slow drip of water that slowly erodes your self-concept and your self-worth away. When it comes to blatant racism, one blatant act of racism experienced or witnessing one blatant act of racism happening to someone else can damage a person's self-concept for life. Experiencing and or witnessing microaggressions every day or even just once a week throughout your life can be just as damaging as that one blatant racist experience. This damage is nothing to be ashamed of. Please understand that. It is something to take control of. Being damaged by racism only shows that you are a fully functioning human being. We have been so conditioned to believe in the hierarchy of the man-made construct of race that we think abusing other people of color is just normal and they can handle it. It's a way of life. We think people of color are born to suffer and to live in pain. We have therapy and recovery strategies for every kind of emotional and psychological negative traumatic experience that we human beings can go through. We have therapy for child abuse. We have therapy for domestic abuse, for drug and alcohol abuse. We have therapy for people who are going through a divorce or people who are having a baby for the first time. We have diversity training for corporate employees and management teams to better work together more effectively and be more cohesive. We have therapy and training for just about everything on earth except healing the damage done to our self-concepts from the abuse of the man-made construct of race and racism. Somehow, human abuse of racism and the tremendous damage it has done to the self-concept of billions of people globally doesn't really require any kind of healing or processing. Just crossing our fingers and hoping it all works out is good enough for us. The subconscious mind is okay regardless of what's happened to it. We've got to think deeper than that and understand what's happened to our self-concept and self-worth. The emotional stress of the man-made construct of race and racism is something that cannot be ignored or healed on its own. This is utterly ridiculous and very condescending, and it belittles the self-worth of billions of wonderful people of color all across the earth who have been conditioned into the false man-made construct of race and have been abused by racism. To pretend that it isn't happening is the equivalent of pretending child abuse or domestic abuse isn't happening when it is. You will remain with a damaged self-concept and lower self-worth, and a self-concept that is out of alignment with your genetic structure if you don't heal. The healing starts by not being ashamed that your self-concept has been damaged by racism. Not to blame yourself for the way other people are treating and responding to your presence. The man-made construct of race has damaged the minds and hearts of so many people of the world that you could be president of the most powerful nation on earth and still experience racism and microaggressions. These are called the facts. So don't blame yourself for racism and the microaggressions you experience. It is not always your fault in who you are that is causing the microaggressions in your life. Most of the time, people doing this don't even know your name. So how on earth could you be the cause of their ignorant, repugnant behavior? Race-based trauma is very real, and it happens through racial harassment, discrimination, violence, or witnessing violence and discrimination to another person. It happens from your personal memories of racism, from stories and images passed down from family members generation after generation. Race-based trauma happens from institutionalized racism and from the more subtle forms of microaggression in the constant threat of racial discrimination that lures around us. The man-made construct of race and racism are such mind games that we actually spend more time discussing if racism even exists instead of spending time healing from it and learning how to protect our self-concept from it. You don't need some politician, poll, or expert to tell you if you're experiencing any racism. No one walks in the same moccasins as you. For goodness sake, the man-made construct of race itself is racist. Remember, awareness, awareness, awareness. The mind games of racism are like technology. You get a new mind game every year. This doesn't mean that everyone is out to get you or that people from other man-made races that you come across are bigots and racist people, because it's just not so. And you must be very careful not to start to think this way and feel this way. This is critically important. This way of thinking is one of the negative side effects race and racism creates, and it's a downward pull. Racism paranoia is what it's called. Racism paranoia can block your heart and destroy your happiness, kindness, and ability to love yourself and others. It's extremely important to be aware of the damage racism paranoia does to your heart. Our hearts are a very important part of our existence, and not for the reason you might think. Do you remember when we discussed the power of an unobstructed mind in the Power of the Mind section? When we talked about how our minds work? Well, our heart works in the same way. It just opens up some things that the mind can't always access or do. It works like this, remember? When our eyes are unobstructed, we can see. When our ears are unobstructed, we can hear. When our nose and mouth are unobstructed, we can breathe. When our minds are unobstructed, We have access to the powerful universal laws and principles and the wisdom of the world. When our heart is unobstructed, we can love and truly be happy, kind, and caring. This is why we must heal ourselves from the wounds of past and present racism and remove any racism paranoia that is deep within us. Does that make sense? Because if you understand this, everything changes for the better. See, we human beings are not designed just to be loved. A baby needs to be loved. Children need to be loved. But once you turn into an adult, it is now time to love. And if you don't love, you suffer. Just like a child or baby would suffer if they didn't have love around them, if they didn't have loving parents. Research shows that children and babies and infants die from that. Well, we adults die when we stop loving. It's not the things in us. Death is not the real tragedy in life. You may have heard me say this before. It's the things that die in us that is the real tragedy. And race paranoia starts to kill the love that's inside of us. And once we adults stop loving, you can stick a fork in us because it is over. Love is an essential part of our existence. We don't need to be loved. That's a myth. That's great. It's icing on the cake. But what we need to do is to love. I hope that helps you better understand the race paranoia, destructive energy that it causes. This next scenario will give you a clear illustration about how this works. So and it will also help you never forget that it's important to remove the negative out of you and to get yourself in alignment. That's what everything's all about. So let's pretend that someone at your workplace or at your school or at your campus has given you the flu, and you know who this person is. So you become very ill from this flu. I mean, it is a doozy. It is a wallywhopper flu. So you go to the doctor for antibiotic. The doctor gives you the antibiotic, and then you take it to the person that gave you the flu, and you give them all of the antibiotic. Now the flu is still in you, and they're feeling fine. They're feeling enlightened. But yet you continue to be sick, ill, and weakened by the flu. You have to look at racism and the 4 toxins as the flu. That the man-made construct of race is a flu, a virus that has spread across the globe, a cancer that you need to get out of you to be fully alive and to be fully healthy. And once you do this, the mind games of the 4 toxins and racism will have no power over you. You will be truly free from the man-made construct of race, and no one will have the power over your self-concept and self-worth again.